Hello, and welcome to Oversight Services July 2025 Touchpoint presentation, an overview of subcontract, policy, and agreement monitoring. We could have added procurement monitoring to the title slide, which is definitely in the presentation, but then we wouldn't be able to be cheeky and call it the spam presentation. During today's session, you will learn the following things. First, BWDA's request for information pertaining to procurement and subcontract monitoring, policy and agreement monitoring, and the purpose of collecting the information. Secondly, submitting the requested documentation in CWDS. And finally, what gets reviewed during BWDA's monitoring review of the above two sections. First, let's start with the procurement and subcontract and policy and agreement monitoring requests. Each October, BWDA Oversight Services starts monitoring for the current program year, and our first monitoring sections are our procurement and subcontract reviews. Generally, we will send a request for this information at the beginning of the month, with the documentation being due approximately 2 weeks later. Since Oversight Services transitioned over to monitoring in CWDS 2.0, these requests will be automatically generated by the system. An email will go out to the LWDB director and LWDB director alternate contact, so make sure that if you don't receive something during this time period, to check your spam folder. Oversight Services request the following 6 items during this monitoring request. First, a copy of all LWDA WIOA-funded subrecipient service provider contracts effective within the program year being monitored. Sometimes when local boards submit these contracts, they only submit the contract or contracts for the main Title I adult dislocated worker and youth providers, as well as the one-stop operator. These contracts are needed. However, there are only 2 examples. In addition to these contracts, local boards must also submit any other contract or agreement, wholly or partly WIOA funded, where a service is provided. This could include something like a partially WIOA funded IT service contract or agreement, or a contract for an organization to provide financial literacy education services with WIOA funding. If services are being provided and WIOA funding is being used, the contract or agreement must be submitted with the request. Second, copies of the RFP or bid solicitation notice for all applicable contracts effective during the program year being monitored, including any attachments. Third, copies of the public notice for each RFP or bid solicitation for all contracts effective during the program year being monitored. Fourth, copies of all bids or RFP responses received for all applicable contracts effective within the program year being monitored, or documentation for the need for sole source or non-competitive procurement. This includes RFPs which only get one bid or response. Fifth, copies of the completed scoring instruments used to select bidders, as well as signed conflict of interest code forms for any non-board members taking part in the process. And finally, copies of all committee meeting minutes where procurement was discussed or providers were recommended to the LWDB for consideration. This would include any special meeting held solely for the purpose of discussing, scoring, or recommending procurement decisions. Each November, Oversight Services reviews local area policies and agreements. Like the procurement and subcontract monitoring, Oversight Services will send a request for this information at the beginning of the month, with the documentation being due approximately 2 weeks later. Since Oversight Services transition over to monitoring in CWDS 2.0, these requests will be automatically generated by the system. An email will go out to the LWDB director and LWDB director alternate contact, so make sure that if you don't receive something during this time period, to check your spam folder. Oversight Services requests the following information. First, a copy of the local board's most current approved bylaws. Second, a copy of the latest executed CEO agreement, if applicable. This will be applicable for multi-county areas. Third, a copy of the latest CEO fiscal agent agreement. Fourth, a copy of the latest executed CEO LWDB partnership agreement. These first four documents are explained in detail in L&I's local governance policy. Fifth, a copy of the latest fully executed MOU and operating budget and any modifications. More information about this can be found in L&I's MOU policy. Sixth, a copy of any LWDB policies and procedures pertaining to financial management, which may include the procurement policy, cost allocation plan, cash management, internal controls, cost reimbursement, inventory and equipment, program income, travel reimbursement, audit requirements and resolution, property management, debt collection, or allowable costs. Seventh, copies of any local board policies and procedures pertaining to program management, which may include equal opportunity, supportive services, needs-related payments, incentive payments, stipends, file management, program eligibility, self-sufficiency criteria, ITAs, layoff assistance, priority of service, grievances for eligible training provider list, transitional jobs, and training verification and refunds. Eighth, copies of any local risk management policies and procedures, which may include risk assessment, record retention and public access, public record requests, personally identifiable information or PII and data security, monitoring, grievances, incident reporting, and disaster recovery planning. Ninth, copies of any local board HR policies which may include an employee handbook or other policy pertaining to employee classification, benefits, holidays, and PTO, recruitment and selection, employee development, discipline, layoffs, termination and severance, sexual harassment, and equal opportunity and non-discrimination. Finally, copies of any other local board policies or procedures not covered specifically in the above categories, but which pertain to the LWDB or any subrecipient or service provider. Local boards are not required to have policies on each one of the topics mentioned, although BWDA considers it highly recommended, outside of what is required by the regulations, guidance, the local plan, or L&I policy. Following are some considerations local boards should keep in mind as policies and agreements are created, reviewed or revised, and submitted. First, policies and agreements, including the bylaws, should be dated with the original LWDB approval date. This will ensure Oversight Services is reviewing the latest version approved by the local board. If a policy or agreement is still in draft form, the document should note this. Second, policies and agreements should be reviewed and revised, if necessary, on some sort of regular schedule, if not already required by federal or state regulation or policy. This schedule can be set by the LWDB and ensures the policy and procedure documents match current operational standards. Third, the three governance agreements, the CEO, CEO fiscal agent, and CEO LWDB partnership must be reviewed and acknowledged or changed each time a new CEO is elected. Fourth, LWDB bylaws should be regularly reviewed to ensure they are compliant with L&I's local governance policy. Finally, Oversight Services compiles this information in part to fulfill requests by stakeholders like USDOL who monitor L&I, making it vital this documentation gets submitted into CWDS completely and timely. This is why we ask for copies of all your existing policies. Now that we've discussed what documentation is needed, let's move on to how to submit it. On the screen is a good approximation of what you'll see when you click the ellipses on the plan page and go to Edit It. It will come up with the above screen. Under each of the document requests, it will give you the option to add a document URL, or add a document you may have uploaded in a previous monitoring plan. When uploading documents, it is important that each document only contains the document requested. You'll also want to name it something that will make it easy to recognize what the document is. This will help us easily identify the uploaded information and save time in having to contact you to rename it, as this is something we cannot do from the oversight side. It is also important to delineate between different documents because CWDS allows multiple documents to be uploaded with the same name at this time. Please take note, CWDS is now Oversight Services Monitoring System of Record. Submissions will not be accepted through email or through MoveIt. Please contact the Oversight Services Resource account, that's ra-li-bwda-os@pa.gov, or contact your assigned analyst if you're experiencing specific issues. Like logging in, uploading document requests can be found in the LWDB Monitoring Desk Aid in the CWDS Help section, keyword Oversight. Extension requests are a vital part of meeting the needs of local boards as oversight works through program year monitoring. It helps boards avoid unnecessary findings when certain factors present themselves and halt their ability to meet the required deadline. CWDS Online Monitoring will provide boards with the option to request an extension of 1 to 10 days while providing BWDA with a reason why the extension is needed and a timeline for how the local board staff plan to complete the request by the end of the extension due date. These requests happen in real time and will go directly to the assigned analyst for review and approval. Extension request decisions, either approvals or non-approvals, will instantly appear on the LWDB monitoring dashboard once a decision is made. Because these requests are subject to an overnight batch process in CWDS, extension requests must be submitted on the day prior to the due date for them to be timely. Here's what the current procurement and subcontract monitoring tools look like in CWDS. Like our legacy monitoring tool completion process, the tools start with researching to make sure oversight is asking all the most relevant questions with their current citations, and it is where we'll record responses gathered from the documentation submitted by the local board staff. Similarly, on this screen is the Policies and Agreements section of the monitoring tool in CWDS. These were produced from older mock-ups of the monitoring tool in the CWDS testing environment, but should paint the picture of how it looks. Finally, we'll cover some common causes for findings when Oversight Services monitors the local procurement and subcontract sections and the Policies and Agreements section. This is not an exhaustive list. First, procurement scoring sheets do not contain a detailed scoring rubric, or the rubric inadvertently allows for arbitrary scoring by not defining what every number in a particular scoring sheet means. Second, the LWDB staff does not have a copy of the committee meeting minutes where procurement recommendations are made to the local board. Third, a non-local board member on a procurement committee has not completed a conflict of interest code form prior to scoring bids. Fourth, the policies or agreements are either unsigned or undated. An example of this would be if the MOU was missing a partner signature. And finally, the bylaws are not compliant with L&I's local governance policy. This presentation, including all the resources, will be added to the BWDA Media Library on the L&I website for your future reference. If you are attending the live session, please feel free to put any questions you may have in the chat, and we'll respond to as many as possible. If you're viewing this presentation after the session and have any questions, please direct them to the BWDA Oversight Services resource account above, or contact the assigned analyst for the local area. Thank you again for your time and attention.